Mara Okonkwo was 3 hours into a 12-hour shift, up to her elbows in a coolant manifold that smelled like burnt almonds, when the council's ultimatum arrived, and nobody thought to tell her until it was already her problem. She heard it first as a change in the air of the hangar, the particular silence that falls over a room when 40 people all check their comms at once. Then Chief Petty Officer Dellard's voice came over the general channel, flat in the way he got when he was trying very hard not to sound scared. All hands, secure your stations. We have a fleet inbound. It's not ours. Mara pulled her arm out of the manifold, coolant dripping off her glove in slow amber threads, and looked up through the hangar's dome at a sky that had, in the last 90 seconds, acquired 17 new stars. They weren't stars. She knew that the way you know a shape in the dark is a person and not a coat rack, some old animal part of the brain doing math faster than the conscious mind could follow. The ships hung in high orbit over Kestrel Station like they'd always been there, like the sky had simply remembered something it had forgotten to mention. 3 hours later, she was standing in the back of a briefing room that smelled like fear sweat and recycled coffee, holding a wrench she'd forgotten to put down, listening to a voice that had no business sounding so bored, deliver the end of human autonomy in the tone of a man reading a shipping manifest. The voice belonged to something called an emissary-class speaker, a council functionary whose true form nobody in the room had seen and everybody assumed, correctly, was designed that way on purpose. It spoke through a projection that looked like poured mercury wearing the vague suggestion of a face, and it addressed Vice Admiral Priya Anand, the highest-ranking human in the room, and therefore, apparently, the highest-ranking human anywhere that mattered, as though she were a mildly promising intern. The Ganatri Compact has observed your species for 140 of your years, the speaker said. You have exceeded projected timelines for orbital consolidation by a significant margin. This is noted with interest. It is also noted that your technological growth curve, while inefficient, has produced results the Compact did not anticipate at your stage of development. We appreciate the interest, Anand said. Her voice was steady. Mara, watching from the back, could see the pulse jumping in her throat. The Compact's growth oversight charter requires that emergent species meeting certain thresholds submit representative technology for classification and, where applicable, licensing, the speaker continued, as if Anand hadn't spoken. Your species has met this threshold 3 times in the last standard year. You are therefore in violation. The Compact requests, as a courtesy, given your youth, voluntary submission of your primary propulsion architecture, your energy containment methodology, and full technical documentation for your orbital defense grid within 1 local rotation. Compliance will be noted favorably. Non-compliance will result in reclassification of your system as an unmanaged resource zone. Nobody in the room said anything for 4 full seconds, which in a room full of military officers is a very long time. Reclassification, Anand said carefully. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning the Compact will manage the resource directly, the speaker said, with the mild patience of someone explaining that Tuesday follows Monday. This has historically involved relocation of surface populations to designated zones and repurposing of unmanaged infrastructure. It is, I am obligated to note, considerably less pleasant than compliance. 60 of your years ago, the Terra cluster required this intervention. There are still Terra. There are simply fewer of them, and they live where the Compact finds it convenient. Mara felt something go cold and very still in her chest. Around her, she watched 200 years of species-wide bravado. The moon landing, the Mars colonies, the messages humanity had beamed at the stars for a century daring someone to answer, collapse quietly into the specific personal fear of a species that has just been told, politely, that it does not actually own itself. We'll need time to consult with civilian leadership, Anand said. You have 1 rotation, said the speaker, and the mercury face dissolved and the projection winked out, and the room exhaled all at once like a held breath finally released. Mara went back to the coolant manifold because she didn't know what else to do with her hands, and that was where Chief Dellard found her 40 minutes later, looking like a man who'd aged a decade since lunch. Okonkwo, Anand wants engineering leads in the war room, now. I'm not a lead, Chief, I'm second shift maintenance. You're the one who wrote the field manual revision for the Halcyon-class thrusters, Dellard said. The one every yard in the fleet is using now because the old one got 3 people killed explaining torque specs like everybody had a physics degree and no hands. She specifically asked for you. Mara looked down at her wrench, then at her coolant-stained gloves, then back up at Dellard. Why would the Vice Admiral want a maintenance manual writer in a war room? Dellard's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. Because apparently that's the war now. The war room held 9 people when Mara arrived, and she was underdressed and underranked for all of them. Anand sat at the head of a table covered in tablets nobody was looking at, because the actual conversation was happening out loud, fast and without patience for slides. Cannot hand over containment methodology, that's not negotiable. That's the one thing standing between us and them deciding we're not worth the trouble of negotiating with at all, said a woman Mara recognized as Dr. Femi Osei, head of the Compact Liaison Office. A job that had existed for exactly 6 hours. They're not going to accept a refusal, said a man in fleet dress uniform. You heard the speaker. 1 rotation, or they start relocating people. We give them something, or we give them everything. So we give them something, Anand said. The question is what, and the question under that question is what happens the day after we give it to them. Give them the thruster specs, someone suggested. Old generation. Nothing classified. Nothing that sets us back if they reverse engineer it. They won't want old generation, Osei said. They'll know it's old generation in about 4 seconds and they'll take it as an insult, and then we're worse off than if we'd refused. Mara stood near the door, increasingly aware that she had walked into a room full of admirals and diplomats holding a wrench, and that nobody had yet explained why she was there. Ms. Okonkwo. Anand's eyes found her. You wrote the Halcyon Field Manual. Yes, ma'am. Walk me through what's in it. Mara blinked. It's a maintenance manual, ma'am. Torque specs, failure modes, field repair procedures, when to bypass a safety interlock, and when that'll get you killed, that kind of thing. It's not classified. It's not even secret. Every yard tech in the fleet has a copy stuffed in a coverall pocket. Is it accurate? It's more than accurate, Mara stopped, recalibrated for a room full of people who did not want to hear about her professional pride in a maintenance document. It's built from real failures. Every warning in there exists because something specific broke and somebody specific got hurt, or almost got hurt fixing it. It's not theory. It's 40 years of people's mistakes written down so the next person doesn't make them. Something shifted in Anand's face. Not relief, not yet, but the specific alertness of a person who has just heard the shape of an idea they didn't know they were looking for. Dr. Osei, Anand said, what if we don't give them the technology at all? They gave us a deadline, not a menu. What if we give them the manual instead? The room went quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet when someone has said something either brilliant or insane, and nobody's sure yet which. They asked for propulsion architecture and containment methodology, Osei said slowly. A maintenance manual for 1 thruster class isn't architecture. It's not the theory. It's, Vice Admiral, respectfully, it's a how-to guide for people who already have the engine in front of them and need to know which bolt not to touch. Exactly, Anand said, and now there was something almost like the ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth, the first Mara had seen all day. They asked for the crown jewels. We're going to hand them the janitor's clipboard, and we're going to do it with a straight face and call it full technical documentation, because it will not, technically, be a lie. That'll read as an insult, said the man in dress uniform. They'll take it as us, mocking them. Best case, they escalate the reclassification threat. Worst case, worst. Maybe, Anand said. Or maybe it buys us time, because it will take them time to even understand what they're holding. A civilization that inherited its technology instead of building it doesn't have a category for what a maintenance manual even is. They won't know if it's a gift, a joke, or a threat. And confusion, gentlemen, is the only weapon we have that they can't out-tech. Mara found herself speaking before she decided to. It won't just confuse them, ma'am. Every head in the room turned toward her. She kept going because stopping now felt more dangerous than continuing. That manual isn't just torque specs. It's got the whole culture in it if you know how to read it. Every warning label is a story about somebody who screwed up and survived to write it down. Every field improvised fix is a story about somebody who didn't have the part they needed and made do anyway. If whoever reads it actually reads it, really reads it, not just skims for numbers, they're not going to learn how our thrusters work. They're going to learn how we work. Anand looked at her for a long moment. Is that a reason to send it, Miss Okonkwo? Or a reason not to? Mara didn't have an answer ready, and that honesty must have counted for something because Anand nodded slowly, as if the uncertainty itself was the correct response. Get it compiled, Anand said to the room. Full manual, unredacted. Every footnote, every hazard sticker, every field note some grease-stained genius ever scrawled in a margin. We are going to hand the most advanced civilization in this quadrant of the galaxy our least glamorous document, and we are going to do it before they change the terms on us. That's insane, Osei said, but she was already reaching for a tablet. Yes, Anand agreed. So is everything that's happened today. Let's be insane on our terms instead of theirs. The speaker's projection reappeared 11 hours later to receive the transmission, and Mara, invited back to the war room less as an engineer now than as, apparently, the resident expert on the document's soul, watched the mercury face flicker through something that might have been the alien equivalent of surprise as the data package registered. This is incomplete, the speaker said. Where is the architectural theory? The containment mathematics? This is a repair document. That's correct, Anand said. That's what you asked for. Full technical documentation for our propulsion and defense systems. This is it. This is what we use. This is what we hand a 19-year-old on their first day in a hangar bay, and by the time they're 25 they can keep a starship's heart beating with a torque wrench and 40 years of somebody else's hard-won mistakes. There's nothing more real than that. If you want to understand our technology, that's where understanding it actually lives, not in the theory. In the hands that have to keep it running at 3 in the morning when it breaks anyway. The speaker was silent for nearly a full minute, an eternity, for an entity that had, in every prior exchange, responded before Anand finished her sentence. This will be reviewed, it said finally, and the tone had lost some of its earlier boredom, replaced by something Mara couldn't name yet but would come to recognize months later, as the sound of a very old civilization encountering a genuinely new idea, for the first time in longer than it could remember. You have one rotation to determine if it satisfies the charter, Anand said, matching its earlier flatness back at it with something that might have been satisfaction. We'll be here. The projection dissolved. The room stayed silent for a long moment. Well, said Osei, we've either just bought ourselves time or we've just personally insulted a species that could turn this planet into a parking lot. Both are still options as of an hour from now, Anand said. Get some sleep, everyone, Ms. Okonkwo. Stay a minute. Stay, eh? The room emptied. Mara stood at something like attention, unsure whether she was in trouble. You said something back there, Anand said. About the manual containing our whole culture. I want you on the liaison team going forward. Not because you outrank anyone in this building, you don't, but because you understand that document in a way nobody with stars on their collar ever will. If the compact comes back with questions, you're the one who answers them. Ma'am, I fix thrusters. I'm not a diplomat. Neither is anyone else in this building anymore, Anand said. As of today, we're all improvising. Might as well improvise with the people who actually know what they're talking about. 600 light-years away, though away meant something different to a species that had stopped experiencing distance as an obstacle 3,000 years earlier. A compact technical assessor named Ven Kathres sat alone in a review chamber that had been built for beings twice her size, in a civilization that no longer remembered why, and opened the human document for the first time expecting to be bored. She was the 7th assessor to receive it. The first 6 had returned it within an hour, flagged as non-compliant, incomplete, or possibly a deliberate insult requiring escalation. Ven had drawn the file only because she was junior enough that nobody senior wanted to waste more time on what was clearly a wasted afternoon. She almost agreed with the first 6 assessors within the first 10 pages. The document was crude. It used measurement units that didn't map cleanly to compact standards. It was full of what she initially read as errors, repeated warnings, seemingly redundant safety notes, blunt and inelegant prose that a properly educated compact engineer would never have permitted into a technical record. Warning: do not bypass thermal interlock TL7 unless you enjoy being a stain. Ask Petrov. Oh wait, you can't. Signed, the guy who had to clean up after Petrov. Ven stopped scrolling. She read it again. It was... She checked 3 times against her translation matrix to be sure she wasn't misreading tone. A joke. A joke, embedded in a technical safety document, referencing what could only be the death of a named individual, left in the official record not despite the tragedy but seemingly because of it, as a living warning more effective than any sterile hazard classification. Ven had reviewed 11,000 technical documents across 400 years of service. None of them had ever mentioned a specific death by name as a functional safety mechanism. In compact engineering, failure was scrubbed from the record, logged in sealed archives, anonymized, sanitized, treated as an aberration rather than information. The system was not supposed to fail. When it did, the failure was an embarrassment to be buried, not a lesson to be carried forward in the voice of the person who'd lived through it. She kept reading. Page after page she found the same pattern: a warning, a story behind the warning, a name behind the story. Repair conducted in field conditions by Tech Aisha Boyo after primary coolant line ruptured mid-flight. Used a length of hydraulic hose and 40 meters of duct tape. System held for 11 hours until proper repair. Commendation recommended. Also, please stop doing this, Aisha. One of these days duct tape won't save you. Ven sat back in her chair. A chair built for a species that had not sat in genuine physical exhaustion in longer than recorded history, and felt something she did not have a clean word for. It sat somewhere between professional alarm and something uncomfortably close to longing. The compact ships did not fail like this. They could not by design. They were grown and inherited and consecrated more than they were built, technologies so old and so total that no living compact engineer had ever actually repaired one from first principles. When something failed, rarely and always catastrophically, because compact systems weren't designed with graceful failure in mind, only prevention, the response was total replacement, ritual disposal, formal mourning for the loss of the artifact, and a request to the fabrication ministries for a new one, an institution so ancient and so opaque that no one currently serving understood how it actually produced what it produced. Nobody fixed anything. Nobody could fix anything. There was no Venn-shaped role in compact society for a person who understood a machine well enough to save it with a length of hose and 40 meters of duct tape, because the compact had not needed such a person in 10,000 years and had, consequently, stopped producing them. She flagged the document for extended review, a status that required senior authorization and that she, as the 7th and most junior assessor, had no business granting herself. She granted it anyway. The extended review bought humanity 9 more days, which Anand's office spent doing 2 things simultaneously: preparing contingencies for the reclassification threat and, at Mara's increasingly insistent suggestion, opening a direct line to the specific assessor who'd flagged the file. Why her? Osei had asked when Mara first proposed it. She's junior. She has no authority to negotiate anything. Because she's the only one who actually read it, Mara said. Everybody else bounced off it in an hour. She sat with it. That means something. It took 4 days to establish contact, and when Ven Cathras's projection finally resolved in the small conference room Mara had commandeered for the purpose, she looked nothing like the mercury-faced speaker. She'd chosen, deliberately, Mara would later learn, as a gesture whose significance she wouldn't fully understand for weeks, to render herself with an actual, if simplified, physical form. Tall, bird-like, feathered in dull green-gray, with amber eyes that tracked Mara's face with unmistakable, uncomfortable curiosity. You wrote portions of this document, Ven said without preamble, the translation lagging just enough behind her mouth movements to feel faintly uncanny. Some of it. It's a living document. Dozens of people have added to it over the years. Why is it alive? Why does it change? Compact technical documentation is fixed at the point of inheritance. It does not accumulate. It does not. Ven searched for the word, and the translation matrix supplied something halfway between scar and grow. It does not scar. Because things keep breaking, Mara said. And every time something breaks, somebody learns something. If we didn't write it down, the next person makes the same mistake. The manual isn't a rule book. It's a memory. It's every mistake we've ever survived, so the next person doesn't have to survive it blind. Ven was silent for a long moment, amber eyes unmoving. Your engineer, Petrov, she said finally. What happened to him? Mara had wondered if this question would come. Bypassed a thermal interlock on a Halcyon-class thruster during a live test 12 years ago. Because he was in a hurry, and he'd bypassed it 100 times before without incident. The 101st time he wasn't lucky. And you keep his name in the record. As a joke. Not as a joke, Mara said more sharply than she intended. As a memorial that actually does something. If we just wrote, "Do not bypass TL7, people would ignore it in 6 months, the way people ignore every warning label ever printed. But if you know it's got a name attached, a real person, a real story, you remember it. It's not disrespectful. It's the opposite. It means Petrov's death actually prevented other deaths, instead of just being a loss nobody talks about." Ven's feathers, Mara noticed, had shifted position slightly. Flattened in a way she'd later learn was the compact avian equivalent of a held breath. We do not do this, Ven said. When compact systems fail, when a fabrication artifact is lost, we do not name the cause. We do not memorialize the failure. We seal it, and we mourn the artifact, and we request another. In 400 years of service, I have never known the name of a single person who died maintaining compact technology, because in 400 years, I have never known a single person who has had to maintain compact technology because we do not maintain. We inherit, and when the inheritance breaks, we grieve it as a death, and we start again with something new, and we never, ever find out why it broke, because to find out why would require someone to open it, and to open it would require someone who understands it well enough to survive opening it, and we... Ven stopped. You don't have those people anymore, Mara said quietly. We have never had those people, Ven said. Not in any generation I know of. We inherited too much, too early, too completely. Your species is doing something we forgot was possible before we were old enough to forget it was ever necessary. The room was quiet. Mara found, to her own surprise, that she felt something like sympathy for the bird-like figure on the other side of the projection. Not pity, exactly, but the specific ache of watching someone realize they'd lost something without ever knowing they'd had it to lose. I have a question, Ven said, and I would like an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. Okay. Was this document sent to insult us? To demonstrate that you consider our request beneath a true answer? Mara thought about it seriously before responding, because the honest answer mattered more than the comfortable one. It was sent because we weren't willing to hand over the things you actually asked for. But it wasn't meant as an insult. It's the truest thing we could have sent. It's not the theory of how we survive, it's the proof. Ven's amber eyes held hers for a long moment. I believe you, she said. I am not certain anyone in the compact hierarchy above me will. Between the first contact with Ven and the full council session, there was a week Mara would later remember less as diplomacy and more as siege. The slow, grinding kind fought in briefing rooms instead of trenches. The compact did not simply wait for their council to deliberate. They sent auditors. 3 of them, in the 6 days after Ven's extended review request cleared its first procedural hurdle, arrived at Kestrel Station's docking ring with the specific, bloodless efficiency of beings whose job was to find the lie inside a claim too strange to be immediately believed. They were not like Ven. They did not sit with the manual. They ran it through analysis engines that had cracked encrypted diplomatic ciphers from a dozen unwilling civilizations, searching for the hidden architecture they were certain had to be buried beneath the crude prose. A real weapon, a real theory, something worth the elaborate misdirection of pretending your civilization's crown jewel was a document about torque wrenches. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find, and that absence unsettled them more than a discovery would have. They keep asking me the same question in 14 different phrasings, Mara told Anand on the 4th day of the audit, rubbing her eyes in a conference room that had become, in effect, her second home. Where's the real manual? Like this one's a decoy, and somewhere on the station there's a locked vault with the actual physics written down in a font nobody's supposed to read. Is there? Anand asked, not entirely joking. No, ma'am, that's the whole point. There's no vault. This is the vault. We just don't treat it like one because treating it like one is how you get people killed pretending a warning label is beneath them. One of the auditors, a severe, crystalline-voiced being who introduced herself only by a rank designation, Prime Auditor Sethis Vel, requested a private audience with Mara on the 5th day, and Anand, after a long look that communicated exactly how little she liked the idea and exactly how little choice they had, allowed it. You are the primary author, Sethis Vel said without preamble once the door had sealed. I want you to explain to me, honestly, why a species capable of orbital defense grids permits its technical documentation to contain jokes. Humor is inefficient. It consumes bandwidth that could carry information. Explain the inefficiency, or admit the document is theater. Mara considered several diplomatic answers and discarded all of them, mostly out of exhaustion. Because tired people don't read boring documents carefully, she said. You can write do not exceed 40 Newton meters of torque on fastener C12. Catastrophic failure will result, and a 19-year-old on their 4th double shift will skim past it, because it sounds like every other warning they've ignored 100 times without consequence. Or you can write what actually happened the one time somebody didn't skim it, write it with the person's name in it, write it a little bit human, a little bit unfair, a little bit funny in the way things are funny right up until they're not. And that 19-year-old remembers it at 2 in the morning when their hands are shaking and they're tempted to cut a corner. The joke isn't inefficiency, auditor. It's the only part of the warning that actually survives contact with a tired brain. You want to know why your analysis engines can't find the real information underneath the prose. It's because the prose is the information. You're looking for a signal buried in noise. There isn't one. The noise is the signal. That's what maintenance actually is. Communicating not what's technically true, but what a frightened, sleep-deprived person is capable of actually absorbing before they make the mistake that kills them. Sethis Vel was quiet for a long moment, her crystalline projection catching the light in slow, deliberate refractions that Mara would later learn was the closest her physiology came to visible discomfort. We do not train for frightened people, she said finally. We train for correct execution of inherited procedure. Fear is considered a design failure to be engineered out of a system, not a variable to be written for. Then you've been building things that only work when nothing's ever wrong, Mara said. We build for the version of the day when everything already is. The auditors left 3 days later, their formal report inconclusive. The compact bureaucratic equivalent, Ven would later explain, of a stalemate too uncomfortable to resolve cleanly, which was, in its own quiet way, its own kind of victory. It meant the document reached the full council not stripped of context, not filtered through a hostile technical summary, but essentially intact, carried forward by the very confusion it had generated. Nobody could agree on what it was. That uncertainty, more than any argument Mara or Anand could have made, was what finally forced the matter to the council floor. They were right to worry. The full council convened 9 days later, an event so rare that even Ven, junior as she was, had never witnessed one in her 4 centuries of service, to determine humanity's classification, and the debate that followed was, by every account that later reached human ears, the closest the ancient body had come to genuine internal conflict in 1,000 years. The senior faction, led by a council elder whose title translated roughly as Warden of Inheritance, argued the document was proof of exactly the primitiveness the charter existed to manage. a species that maintained its own technology by hand, that suffered casualties in routine operation, that hadn't yet achieved the grace of fabrication inheritance, was a species that hadn't earned sovereignty over dangerous power. Reclassification, the warden argued, would be a mercy, relieving humanity of a burden it wasn't equipped to carry safely, the same mercy the Compact had extended to the Terra, the Corval, the 11 other cluster civilizations now living, safely, precisely where the Compact found it convenient. Fen, invited to testify only because she was the assessor of record and someone needed to explain the anomalous review timeline, found herself doing something she had never done in 400 years of quiet, competent service. She argued back. The warden calls it primitiveness, she said, into a chamber of beings who had not been contradicted by a junior assessor in longer than most of them could remember. I call it the thing we no longer have. We have not repaired a fabrication artifact in 10,000 years because we no longer know how, and we no longer know how because we stopped needing to, and we stopped needing to because at some point in our history, a point none of us can name because we did not think it worth recording, we decided that a civilization worthy of its own greatness should not have to touch it with its own hands. We built a charter to manage species who still touch their own greatness. I would ask the Council to consider that we built that charter not from wisdom, but from envy we forgot we were capable of feeling. The chamber, by every report, went very quiet. It did not resolve the debate. Ancient institutions do not pivot on a single junior officer's testimony, however sharp. But it did something perhaps more consequential. It split the vote, delayed the reclassification order past its administrative deadline, and bought humanity something it had not yet earned through any conventional diplomatic channel: time and doubt, planted in the mind of a civilization that had not doubted itself in 10 millennia. The reprieve lasted 11 weeks, and it was not the Council's continued debate that broke the stalemate. It was a compact transport vessel, the Ash Crown Reliquary, a ceremonial-class fabrication artifact 800 years old, carrying among its cargo Ven Cathris on an unrelated diplomatic circuit, suffering a catastrophic containment fluctuation 40 light minutes from Kestrel Station in a region of space with no compact repair infrastructure within reach and a failing containment field with, by the ship's own increasingly desperate diagnostic chorus, 6 hours before total breach. Mara was asleep when the emergency channel woke her. Kestrel Station had picked up the distress signal by accident, an old model relay still listening on frequencies the Compact considered beneath their notice, and she was in the war room in under 9 minutes, hair still wet, listening to Ven's voice come through garbled and static cut, stripped of all its earlier careful composure, containment matrix destabilizing. We do not have a repair protocol for this failure mode. No living engineer aboard has ever opened a primary containment housing. The fabrication ministries do not respond to distress calls of this classification, because this failure mode is not supposed to be possible. Ven. Mara's voice cut through the static, steadier than she felt. Ven, it's Mara. I need you to patch me into your engineering deck. Your systems are not compatible with... I don't need compatible, I need eyes and hands. Do you have anyone aboard who can physically access the containment housing? A long pause, filled with alarm tones Mara didn't recognize but understood perfectly. There is a maintenance drone. It is not rated for direct manipulation of fabrication components. No one is rated for that. It has never been necessary. It's necessary now, Mara said. Get me eyes on that housing. I need to see what I'm working with. What followed was, by any honest account, the strangest 90 minutes of Mara Okonkwo's life. Standing in a war room on a human space station, guiding a repair drone she'd never operated, aboard an alien ship built on principles no human engineer had ever studied, through a failure mode that existed in no manual she'd ever written, because the manual she'd written was for machines that were built to be understood, and the fabrication artifact dying 600 kilometers away had been built, 10,000 years ago, by a process the Compact itself no longer remembered, to be worshipped rather than opened. Okay, Mara said, watching the drone's camera feed resolve into a tangle of components that meant nothing to her and everything to her at once. Because underneath the alien materials and alien geometry, a failing containment system was, in the end, a system trying to hold something dangerous in a stable state. And stable states failed for reasons that were, underneath all the specifics, universal. Pressure differentials, thermal stress, a seal degrading faster than its redundancies could compensate. Okay, Ben, I need you to trust me on something that's going to sound insane. I am currently trusting a species I met 11 weeks ago to save a ship that has survived 8 centuries without ever needing to be trusted to anyone, Ven said. Insane is a relative measurement at this point. Your containment field is failing because the primary seal's degrading faster than the secondary can compensate, right? That's a pressure problem before it's an energy problem. You don't need to fix the containment matrix. You need to buy it time by relieving pressure somewhere it can afford to lose it. Is there a venting protocol? Anything, even a manual override, even something not meant for this? There is an emergency purge valve. It is ceremonial. It has never been activated. It is not rated for use during active containment failure. The engineering logs explicitly warn against VIN. What happens if you don't use it? Silence. Total breach in approximately 4 hours, Ven said quietly. Then the warning against using it was written by someone who never imagined the alternative was worse, Mara said. That's how every warning label I've ever written works too. Somebody wrote never do this because in 99 scenarios out of 100, doing it makes things worse. This is the 100th scenario. Use the valve. There was a long, static-filled pause that felt, to Mara, like the longest 90 seconds of her professional life. Venting, Ven said. Venting, containment field stabilizing, pressure differential decreasing. Mara, it's holding, it's holding. The war room, Mara realized only afterward, had filled with people during the crisis without her noticing. Anand, Osei, Dellard, a dozen others, all watching the feed in silence, all holding the particular stillness of people watching something that mattered too much to interrupt. You'll need a real repair, not just a purge, Mara said, allowing herself to exhale for the first time in an hour. That seal's not going to hold long term, but it'll hold long enough to get you somewhere with actual repair capability. Ven, do you have anywhere to go? Any facility that's ever handled this kind of failure? Another silence, different in texture from the last. No, Ven said. I do not believe such a facility has existed in any compact territory, in longer than our recorded history extends. Then come here, Mara said, before she'd fully thought it through, before anyone with more rank than her could object. Kestrel Station, we don't know your systems, but we know how to fix things that aren't supposed to break. Come here, and we'll figure it out together, and you'll bring home a repaired ship instead of a dead one, and maybe that's worth more to your council than any manual we could have sent them. Anand at the back of the room did not object. Mara would learn later that she'd simply nodded once to Osei and said quietly, "Let her." The Ash Crown reliquary limped into Kestrel Station's outer berth 6 hours later, and what followed was 11 days that no human engineering team had ever trained for, and no compact protocol had ever anticipated. A joint repair effort between a species that had never touched a fabrication artifact and a species that had never touched their own. It was not elegant. Mara's team burned through 3 separate approaches before finding a seal patch that would hold against compact containment pressures, using materials that had never been designed for the purpose, guided by instinct and improvisation more than any existing manual, because no manual existed for this. And by the 4th day, Mara had started keeping notes, out of habit, out of the same impulse that had built the Halcyon Field Manual in the first place. If we're the first people to ever do this, somebody after us shouldn't have to do it blind. Ven worked beside her for all 11 days, learning to hold a plasma torch with hands that had never done manual labor in 400 years of service, burning herself twice, laughing, an alien sound Mara hadn't known compact physiology could produce until she heard it. The second time it happened, because by then the burn was less alarming than familiar, an initiation rather than an injury. This is absurd, Ven said on the 9th day, wrapping a fresh burn on her hand with a strip of human synthetic bandage that had clearly not been designed for feathered limbs. I am a technical assessor of the 412th rank. I have never once in my career been permitted to touch the systems I was assessing, and now I am covered in burns from a plasma torch, patching an 800-year-old sacred artifact with human hull sealant, and I have never—" She stopped, searching for the translation, and settled on something that came out as never felt more like I understood my own hands. "Welcome to maintenance," Mara said, and meant it as more than a joke, and Ven, amber eyes steady on her, understood that too. The repaired Ashcrown reliquary departed Kestrel Station on the 12th day, and Ven Cathris carried back to the Council not a diplomatic report, but something closer to a confession, a full account of the failure, the repair, and the human hands that had made it possible, an account that, for the first time in compact recorded history, named names, described mistakes, and treated a fabrication crisis not as a tragedy to be sealed and mourned, but as an event to be understood, documented, and learned from. And she filed it, deliberately in the format of the human manual she'd first flagged 11 weeks earlier. Warnings written in a survivor's voice, failures attributed to specific choices rather than abstract misfortune, and a closing note that the Council elders would spend the following year arguing over, because it did not fit any existing category of compact institutional communication. Containment purge valve, emergency use, previously rated unsafe under all conditions. Revised rating, safe under conditions worse than the alternative. This document exists because someone was willing to be wrong in a new way, instead of correctly dead in an old one. Recommend all fabrication artifacts receive equivalent emergency protocols, written by people willing to have been wrong before, because we no longer have any, and it nearly cost the reliquary and everyone aboard her. The Council's final ruling, when it came 4 months later, was not the sweeping reclassification the Warden of Inheritance had originally sought, nor the full sovereignty humanity had quietly hoped for. It was something stranger, and in its way, more honest. Humanity was granted provisional independent status, a classification that had not existed in the Charter before the Council, unable to agree on precedent, was forced to invent one. Recognized not as a threat to be contained, nor a resource to be managed, but as something the Compact's ancient framework had genuinely never anticipated. A species whose value lay not in what it could be made to surrender, but in a competence the Compact itself had lost the capacity to produce. The cost was real, and it was Mara's to carry as much as anyone's. The 11 days aboard the reliquary had exposed her, and everyone on her team, to containment radiation the Compact's own engineers hadn't fully understood the danger of until after the fact, a slow, cumulative toll that would, the medical assessments made clear, take years off lives that had been spent, in the end, willingly. Dellard retired earlier than planned, his hands no longer steady enough for fine repair work. 2 of Mara's junior techs would spend the rest of their careers with a tremor they'd earned, saving a ship that wasn't theirs to save. Nobody in the war room called it a victory, without also, quietly, calling it a price. Mara stood on the observation deck of Kestrel Station 8 months after the ultimatum first arrived, watching Ven's shuttle prepare for departure, a final visit, ostensibly diplomatic, that had stretched into something neither of them had bothered pretending was purely professional. "You'll keep sending updates?" Mara asked. "To the manual. When something breaks on your end and you figure out how to fix it. I have petitioned the Council to establish a formal fabrication maintenance division," Ven said. "The first in 10,000 years. I have also petitioned to lead it, which the Warden of Inheritance considers either visionary or treasonous, depending on which hour of the day you ask him." "And which is it?" "Both, I suspect. Most useful things are." Ven's amber eyes settled on the human manual displayed on the tablet between them, Mara's own, dog-eared and annotated now with 8 months of Ven's careful marginal notes, in a script that didn't quite match the neat translated text, additions the Council hadn't sanctioned and Ven hadn't asked permission for. "I used to believe this document was crude because it admitted failure so openly. I no longer believe that. I believe it is honest because admitting failure is the only way anything gets to keep working. We built 10,000 years of civilization on the premise that our tools should never break, and so we never learned what to do when they did. You built 200 years of civilization on the premise that everything breaks eventually, and so you built the only thing that actually matters, the knowledge of how to keep going anyway. That's a nicer way of putting it than we're too broke and too new to build things that don't need fixing, Mara said. Perhaps, Ben said. Or perhaps that is simply what grace looks like, when it has not yet had the chance to become vanity. She held out a hand, a gesture she'd learned from Mara over 11 repair-filled days and had, evidently, decided to keep. And Mara shook it, feeling the old burn scar on Ven's palm, the same one she'd wrapped in human bandage on the 9th day. Try not to start any more galactic conflicts before I'm back, Ven said. No promises, Mara said. But if we do, I'll write it down. Somebody after us shouldn't have to make the same mistake blind. Ven's shuttle departed 20 minutes later, and Mara stayed on the observation deck long after it had folded into the dark, holding the tablet with its 8 months of alien handwriting crowding the margins of a document that had started as 40 pages of torque specs and hazard warnings, and had become, somehow, without anyone quite intending it, the first line of a conversation between two civilizations that would take generations to finish. She opened to the last page where Ven had left her final note before departure, translated now into careful human script beneath the original. Warning. This document will make you believe you understand a species. You will not. You will understand only that they were willing to write down what broke them, so that whoever came next would not have to break the same way twice. This is not a small thing. In 10,000 years we forgot it was possible. Do not let it be small to you either. Mara closed the tablet, and out past the dome of the station the stars that had once seemed fixed and finished went on being, quietly, unfinished, the way everything worth keeping running always was.